what beyond the discussion of a 30-day ceasefire has substantively been discussed with the Ukrainians, perhaps even agreed, though according to the Ukrainian responses, nothing. Now, what I mean by that is there isn't going to be a ceasefire just standing alone. Uh, why would there be? The Russians will not accept that. They have the military momentum, and they've not heard a word officially from the Ukrainian side about any of the fundamental causes of the war. And that's what the Russians say, but it's true. Also, it's not just a Russian position. This war has to be ended on political grounds, the most fundamental of which include three items. Ukrainian neutrality versus the ongoing demand by Ukraine and by many of Ukraine's partners in Europe for NATO membership. The second is a settlement on territorial issues. And the third is a settlement on some kind of security arrangements in the context of a peace agreement. Now, we haven't heard publicly any movement by the Ukrainian government on any of those three items. According to the Ukrainian government, from what I've heard, and I may have missed something, but the demand for NATO membership continues essentially, or continues to this day. The demand for a full recovery of all territories to the 1991 borders continues to be the official position. And regarding security, basically NATO membership or NATO troops continue to be, including the participation of the United States, continue to be the position regarding security. Now, those are not the basis for peace because Russia has security interests that are fundamental that led to this war. Russia has the momentum on the battlefield. So calling for a 30-day ceasefire by itself means nothing. Now, presumably, when the United States representatives and the Ukrainian representatives met in Jeddah, they didn't spend 8.5 hours behind closed doors discussing a very short statement. They discussed these basic conditions. One might suspect that there was some movement on these. The United States has more or less made a very major movement on these, saying that yes, NATO will not enlarge. There will have to be territorial concessions. There will have to be security arrangements that do not include, for example, the United States. Ukraine, to my knowledge, to the time that we speak, has not made any public movement on these, and we don't know if there was private movement. Now, after that 8.5 hour meeting in Jeddah, the U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with President Putin. It was one could say, a congenial meeting in a way. The meeting itself was mutually respectful, diplomatic. The statements that came out of it were the same. Russia saying, yes, we could agree with a ceasefire if the fundamental causes of this war are recognized. There was a further exchange regarding Ukrainian troops surrounded in the Kursk region. In the 2 days that followed, there were upbeat statements by President Trump on his social media. Presumably, something's happening behind the scenes, but we don't know. And the statements coming from European leaders are as bellicose as ever. So we have probably two levels of diplomacy taking place, something behind closed doors, something in public. If the only thing we have is the United States essentially saying that NATO will not enlarge, that there need to be territorial concessions, and that a security arrangement will not involve the United States, but that there is no agreement on those fundamental issues, either by Ukraine or by uh, major European powers, then I think what we will have is the United States just extricating itself from this conflict, and events will follow on in Ukraine, probably Ukraine's major losses on the battlefield. But if there is behind closed doors more agreement, which I think is quite plausible, then maybe we're heading towards a real agreement.
Yeah, well, the narrative in Europe responding to this ceasefire, they interpret it first, at least in the media, as a take it or leave it deal to the Russians. So there was a great deal of excitement because the assumption was the Russians can't accept this, and once they don't accept it, the US should go after Russia in a big way. So in other words, uh, the US should return and come back to our side of yeah, pursuing a long war instead. And then you had Starmer, he built this into the narrative that, well, Zelensky showed he wants peace, but now Putin does not. So it's been used for everything it's worth. But of course, from coming from Trump, something else is being said. He said, he's optimistic. Putin respects America, and Ukraine shouldn't have picked a fight, in his words, with a much more powerful adversary. But where is the scope for compromise here? I'm curious because neutrality, it encompasses a lot. It's security guarantees, it's any peacekeepers on the ground. All of these are issues related to neutrality. Of course, with the territorial disputes, there seems to be some more leeway, or at least there could be some in terms of where the administrative borders are pulled, because Trump said that we'll be talking about land and we'll be talking about power plants. I'm assuming this is the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is under Russian control, and it's on its side of the Dnieper, a bit too uncomfortably close to Crimea. So, where do you think is a possibility to meet halfway? Would it be on the security architecture, or how do you view? Well, how much room is there for actual maneuver for both sides?
First, let me say what Starmer and Macron say makes absolutely no sense to me at all. The British almost never make any sense to me anyway, I have to say, in everything that they say, because the bellicosity, the Russophobia, the lack of any sense of diplomacy, it has 200 years of history, and it's very sad and unrealistic. But in terms of an expression of what's actually happening, it's delusional. The idea that Trump made a take it or leave it offer, and that the US was going to, quote, rejoin the war is completely delusional. Trump and the United States are not going to rejoin the war with new packages of military aid and an extended war in Ukraine. The United States, in its current political, fiscal, military, geopolitical uh, conditions, is not going to do that. Why the Europeans believe that, I don't know if they believe that. Why they express that in public is beyond me, because being wrong all the time, as the British and the French are, does not seem to me to be clever bargaining, clever negotiating, clever politics. So I view it as incompetence and intransigence rather than actually even tactical, much less strategic insight on their side. Of course, everything I'm saying could be wrong. The United States could announce, well, Russia is not moving, so we rejoin the war. I find it impossible in the context of American politics and American interests, and Trump's own position and the repeated positions of all those around him, to believe that anything like that is remotely the case. So let me start there. I don't give any credence whatsoever to the British and French positions. Uh, and I've heard privately from European leaders to the contrary. So let me just add that as well. When it comes to the actual uh, conditions for peace, I do believe the NATO question is a sine qua non. The NATO question is, in my view, the fundamental casus belli. It goes back 30 years. It's not a secret. Many times, Western officials have expressed the truth about this. Trump has said the truth about this. U.S. officials have said Ukraine is not joining NATO. Ukraine is not joining NATO, period. Everybody needs to understand this. It's not going to happen. Whether NATO survives is yet another matter, by the way. It's not beyond thinking that 10 years from now there's no NATO. But given that, Ukraine is not joining NATO. Okay, next. What about territory? Well, Crimea is not going back to Ukraine. It was part of Russia for uh, centuries until a rather arbitrary maneuver when Crimea was gifted, so-called, to an administrative part of the Soviet Union, that is the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, in 1954 on an occasion of a 300th year celebration of a treaty which had made, according to the Russian view of it, Ukraine subordinate to the Russian Empire back in 1654.